Beside seeing Blade paired with Luocha for the obvious reasons, because he's such a great healer, the two core Blade comps that I'm seeing around are Blade with Bronya and Blade with Silverwolf or Pela. And that's for good reasons, but I wanted to understand from a team building perspective, where does Blade sit with the current unit catalog that we have? In this video today, I'm going to break it down real quickly and give some team ideas for when Blade drops given the current units that we have. Emphasis on current. I did do a video on Blade recently where I went into his skill point economics and how his mechanics work, so I won't dredge too far into that, but to cut a long story short before we get into team building, Blade can function either as your main DPS or your sub-DPS, depending on your team structure. With the units we have in the game right now, he does sit well as a main DPS because our unit catalog lends itself to optimizing a team around him specifically, rather than trying to slot him in as some AoE win damage on the side. However, while I do think he plays better as a main DPS with what we currently have, I'm actually going to be playing him as a sub-DPS and I'll explain my team at the end of this. Now, he isn't set to do as much damage as someone like Sele, but that doesn't mean he can't function as a main DPS under the right situations. To get the absolute most out of Blade, you're going to want Blade to be the target of most damage, and you want him to move away from shielders or preservation characters and make sure you're keeping him afloat with a strong healer. So, let's start with the teams. I'm going to start very basic with the Struggle Plus, like full free to play, this is all I have team. And I'm leading with this team because I want to very quickly counteract or add a caveat to what I just said about shielders. Fire MC, if you're really stuck for teams, is the one preservation character that I would say you could go for if you were really struggling and need a shielder. It's going to hurt your damage output a lot, and so you'll most likely want to see another DPS in here with Blade to make up for it. But the reason you can do the Fire MC is that the Fire MC shield is pretty small, and so the hopes here when building a team is that the Fire MC is going to AoE shield your team from AoE attacks, but it's gonna let Blade take single target damage with enough gusto that's gonna still break through his shield and actually cause damage to Blade. So it's not the most ideal setup, but with thanks to the Fire MC's relatively smaller shield compared to someone like Capard or March 7th, he shouldn't completely block out Blade's talent. Now, if you do go for the Fire MC, then you want to make sure that you avoid an aggro boosting light cone like Moment of Victory or Lando's Choice. Now, Natasha's going to be a staple here because the way that Blade works is that through his skill into his basic attack and his ultimate, he wants to reduce his own HP to boost his talent, and then he also wants his HP reduced by enemies to boost the counts on his talent. As your only free-to-play healer, Natasha is going to be here to counteract all the HP that Blade is going to lose. Additionally, she has a healing regen in her skill and also a debuff in her heal, so she's got some really good generalist support. Additionally, she is on his banner, so you are likely to get a few copies of her. Might as well make the most of her. Now, I did say when looking at using this comp, you might struggle for damage overall, and so it's not going to hurt you to slot in another damage dealer here. Qingxue, Dan Heng, whoever you have, I would prefer a single target damage dealer myself, but follow your heart and just use whatever you've got spare as long as you can get Blade in your comp and you're happy to play him. Moving outside of this, like I say, struggle bus free-to-play team, we do have a free-to-play into low-spend team. So this team is trying to integrate in some different units to the ones we just mentioned to give some optionality around your Blade comps for low spending. Natasha's staying the same for reasons above. You do need a healer. She's non-negotiable unless you have Bilo or Luocha when playing Blade. Pela, she's here to defense shred the enemy, which will directly amplify Blade's damage, and also she can debuff the enemy with her skill. Now, Tingyun isn't the most optimal overall unit, but you can slot her into the team to give some damage variability through the lightning element imbue she offers. Her damage buff is limited here because it focuses on attack overall, and if you don't know, the way that Blade's current scalings are set is that he's going to scale predominantly off of HP percent with some minor attack percent scalings thrown in for his damage. So her damage buff is very limited here because it's focused on attack overall, but Tingyun works in this team because she can funnel energy into Blade to give you good control over when you want to use Blade's ultimate. Like Blade, she's also very skill point efficient, and so you can let Natasha perma heal you, or you can be pretty flex with Tingyun's early blesses to refill her own energy quicker and then keep on funneling that into Blade. Now, depending if you pulled on the Silver Wolf banner, you may have a good character to pair up with Blade, so let's talk about this team comp here. We're running with an impairment / defense drop focus here. You're running Blade and then any healer you have, so Natasha, Bailu or Luocha. Silver Wolf is here to try and hope that she applies wind weakness, although it could be a bit difficult because it really does depend on what weaknesses the enemy already has, as well as basically what, you've got 4 different elements on the team potentially. Now, the idea is that she will apply a wind breakness wherever reasonably possible, and then when it does get its use, she can also reduce the resistance to wind element type. On top of this, when she's not hitting the wind element weakness imbue, she was also able to have a variability in her defense, attack, and speed debuffs thrown in for the fun of it, so overall a good strategic debuffer. When you throw Pela in here, she rounds out full defense breaking for the reasons we mentioned in the last team, but she can also scale the amount of output she has based on the amount of debuffs on the enemy, so paired with Silver Wolf, she makes for a great, now a bit stronger offensive capacity. The goal of this team basically being to fully round out the damage Blade can do by shredding the enemy's overall tankiness and resistance through debuffs and impairments. Next up, we have Blade sitting in the hypercarry default team. We are at kind of a higher luck or spending here. We're running Blade along with Bronya, who is a great companion to Blade. She can advance forward Blade, allowing him to attack more frequently, which doesn't necessarily hurt Blade's playstyle because he is pretty much skill point neutral. She can also remove any debuffs Blade has been given through her skill because Blade is the intended target for enemy damage, and so he's likely to often get debuffed, to be honest. Additionally, she can buff Blade's offensive presence with an overall damage buff that benefits him despite his HP scalings, and so she makes for a great pair up with Blade. You then have Pela or Silver Wolf here for all of the reasons we've already mentioned. However, you might find that Silver Wolf with Bronya might eat into your skill point usage a bit too much if you're not careful, and so while Silver Wolf will make Blade extremely threatening in this situation, especially with the combined wind offensive type in, you do need to be mindful that you don't want to eat too much into your skill points to then prevent your healer, someone like Luocha in this case, from doing what he's there to do, aka heal. So next up is it's non-optimal team, but it's optimal for my account personally, and this is what I'm going to be playing Blade as, just because these are the units I have, and while they are stepping outside of the kind of Blade core that I've been seeing going around, it's just what kind of suits me personally, and so I just wanted to go through my reasoning and also show kind of a different way that you could play Blade. So Jingyuan is my main DPS. He's the only character that I have max built and max invested, and so I tend to wheel him out wherever reasonably possible. With Blade, I'm going to have good AoE coverage overall, and Blade is actually performing here as a sub-DPS and pseudo-tank. Luocha is here because of his ridiculous heals and the safety net available to Blade for falling under 50% health. Finally, I have Tingyun here. Tingyun is here to actually help me get Jingyuan up to more frequent ultimates for the maximum Lightning Lord stacks, and to reduce overall skill point consumption so both Jingyuan and Luocha can use their skills as often as they need to. I'm using Duo Electric here as I don't want to break the enemy with Quantum Freeze or Imaginary too often, as I want them to still be attacking Blade as often as possible, and I can in situations swap Tingyun out for my copy of Welt, who will offer defense shredding and slow, but again I am conscious that too much of this kind of weakness breaking or too much slowing will actually reduce the enemy's momentum here, and it will actually reduce overall how often they attack Blade, which will then reduce his damage overall. So I'm opting for Tingyun because on paper she may not seem like the most optimal, but for my team's playstyle she will be. It's just a different way of showcasing that while it's not the traditional Blade core, you can still think about with what your unit catalog has, how you can basically play him to suit your account. Now, that's kind of it for some of the basic teams. We will learn more about him as he drops, but I do like to give some final things to consider. I just touched upon one a minute ago, and that is that Blade plays very similar to someone like Clara. He wants to get hit as much as possible so that he can stack his talent up and basically deal more damage for how often he is targeted. The main difference being that when he loses HP, whereas Clara just counters. However, one thing I will be doing when I'm thinking of my team buildings is I am going to be limiting the amount of imagination, quantum, or freeze, as I've just mentioned, because you don't want to hinder the enemy from acting too much, so you can have them feed damage into Blade, and so characters whose break abilities will apply burn, shock, bleed, or wind shear are probably going to shine well with him overall in just team synergy capacity. Additionally, because of Blade's overall HP% scaling mechanic being stronger than his attack attack% scaling mechanic, he doesn't get a lot out of attack buffers. So someone like Tingyu, while she has been mentioned, or Asta, will lose some of their usual utility ceiling that they get praised for. He does have some attack percent scaling from what we've seen, but it's way less impactful than his HP scaling, and so you've just got to be really careful when picking your supports. Finally, I wouldn't pair him with someone like Clara, even if I was going for a full destruction run on the simulated universe, because they are going to fight out for aggro, and so basically too much aggro split is just going to reduce the amount of damage they both do together, because basically Blade's not going to have enough HP lost, and then Clara's not going to be able to counter enough. So pairing them together is just not going to work from what I've seen right now, but who knows, maybe in the future with certain characters being released, we might be able to fix that. Finally, I would be careful with pairing him with Arlen, even though Arlen is on his banner, because with Arlen you do run the risk of spreading your healer way too thin, because Arlen likes to sit very low down on HP to boost his damage, whereas someone like Blade likes to constantly lose HP. And unless you've got a very strong AoE healer, someone like Bailu for example, who can, and even then Bailu's unreliable because of the bounce, but someone like Bailu for example, you are going to struggle even with that 5-star healer. And so for me personally, I wouldn't run the risk of pairing him with Arlen at this stage, but if you feel comfortable enough to do it because you've got your Blade maxed out and he's built quite strong and you know how to balance his ultimate to manage his, I don't know, his health, maybe go for it. It's just for me, I wouldn't personally. So they were my thoughts on teams ready for Blade. He is due tomorrow? What day is it? Tomorrow. So I wish everyone luck if they are pulling for him, and yeah, that's it. Thanks. Bye.